The blue lights of the Galactic Council chamber cast long shadows across the marble floor as Admiral Crix reviewed his monthly reports. 3,000 years of peace had made these meetings routine, almost boring. 847 member species, all living in harmony under Council law. The Admiral's scaled fingers tapped against his datapad as he scrolled through the endless lists of trade agreements, mining permits, and diplomatic exchanges. He paused at one entry: humans, Sol System, Earth. A small smile crossed his reptilian features. The humans were perhaps the most amusing discovery in recent memory. 200 years ago, Council scouts had found them confined to a single yellow star, barely capable of splitting atoms, still fighting wars with chemical explosives. The xenobiology team had classified them as Class D primitives with a note in red text: no threat assessment required. Even now, after 2 centuries of limited contact, they remained charmingly backward. Their largest achievement was a few mining colonies on the red planet they called Mars, and some ice harvesters on one of their gas giant moons. The Council had graciously granted them basic trading rights, allowing them to exchange raw materials for simple technology and food supplements. Admiral Crix pulled up the surveillance reports from the Sol System. The automated monitoring stations showed the same peaceful activity they had recorded for decades. Human cargo ships moved slowly between Earth and Mars, carrying iron ore, water ice, and agricultural products. Their vessels were crude, barely capable of interplanetary travel, much less the faster-than-light jumps that true spacefaring races had mastered. Millennia ago, the humans seemed content with their small corner of the galaxy. They asked few questions. During trade negotiations, accepted whatever prices the Council merchants offered, and never complained about the restrictions placed on their technology imports. Perfect citizens, really. Quiet, harmless, and grateful for the Council's protection. What Admiral Crix did not know was that far beneath Earth's Pacific Ocean, Dr. Alina Voss was putting the finishing touches on humanity's greatest deception. The underwater facility stretched for kilometers along the ocean floor, hidden from any orbital scan by layers of natural rock and carefully placed interference generators. Inside the massive complex, thousands of humans worked in shifts around the clock, their activities coordinated with precision that would have impressed even the most advanced Council species. Elena stood before a holographic display showing the internal structure of a Council faster-than-light drive. She had been studying these systems for over 30 years, ever since the first Council trader had carelessly left detailed schematics accessible on an unsecured datapad. The alien technology was elegant, but humanity had found ways to improve it. The efficiency is up another 12%, reported Dr. James Park, Elena's lead engineer. Our version can jump twice as far on the same energy consumption. Elena nodded, but her expression remained serious. Good, but remember, we need them to keep thinking we're struggling with basic rocket propulsion. Every improvement we make stays hidden until the day we need it. Across the facility, other teams worked on equally impressive projects. Human scientists had reverse-engineered Council shielding technology and made it stronger. They had studied alien weapons systems and designed better ones. They had analyzed the biological data from every Council species they had encountered, mapping weaknesses and vulnerabilities that the peaceful aliens had never considered. Above them, on the surface, the world continued its careful performance. Human diplomats maintained their role as eager but simple students, grateful for any scraps of knowledge the advanced aliens chose to share. Human traders accepted unfair deals with cheerful resignation, playing the part of primitives who didn't know better. General Marcus Reed walked through another hidden facility, this one carved into the heart of a large asteroid in the belt between Mars and Jupiter. Here, the deception was even more complete. Council sensors detected only a small mining operation, exactly what they expected to find. They had no idea that the asteroid had been hollowed out and transformed into one of humanity's primary shipyards. The general paused before a massive viewing window overlooking the construction bays. Dozens of warships hung in various stages of completion, each one larger and more advanced than anything the Council believed humans could build. These weren't the clumsy cargo haulers that alien visitors saw when they came to the Sol system. These were predators designed by a species that had spent its entire history learning how to kill efficiently. "How many are operational?" Reed asked his aide, Colonel Williams. 1,500 and counting, Williams replied. "The new production lines are ahead of schedule. We'll have 3,000 ready within 2 years. Reed nodded, but his face showed no satisfaction. 3,000 ships sounded impressive until you considered the scale of the galaxy. The Council Navy had over 50,000 vessels, though most were exploration ships and cargo escorts rather than true warships. After 3 millennia of peace, the Council had forgotten how to build for war. That was humanity's advantage. Humans had never forgotten. On Earth, in a small apartment in Geneva, Ambassador Robert Wynne prepared for another Council meeting. His role was perhaps the most difficult of all the human deceptions. He had to attend every session, listen to the alien delegates discuss galactic policy, and pretend that humanity was too primitive to understand or contribute meaningfully. The other ambassadors treated him with the kind of patient condescension reserved for children or pets. They would explain simple concepts slowly, as if his human brain might struggle to keep up. They made decisions about galactic trade routes, defense policies, and scientific research programs without asking for Earth's input, assuming that humans had nothing valuable to offer. Wynne endured it all with a smile and took careful notes. Every casual comment about military capabilities, every offhand mention of strategic resources, every technical detail shared in confidence went into humanity's growing database of galactic intelligence. His reports were transmitted to Earth through channels that the Council's monitoring systems couldn't detect. Human engineers had long ago cracked the Council's communication protocols and learned to piggyback their signals on legitimate trade transmissions. For 2 centuries, humanity had been listening to every conversation, reading every document, and watching every military exercise the supposedly advanced aliens conducted. The data painted a clear picture. The Galactic Council was soft, comfortable, and completely unprepared for real conflict. Their weapons were designed for ceremony rather than war. Their ships prioritized comfort and efficiency over combat capability. Their military doctrine assumed that any threat could be resolved through negotiation and compromise. It was exactly the kind of weakness that humanity had learned to exploit during its violent climb from caves to starships. Back in the Deep Ocean Facility, Elena Voss received the latest intelligence reports from across the galaxy. Council species were beginning to detect strange signals from the galactic rim, beyond the edge of known space. Something was moving in the darkness between stars, something that didn't respond to the Council's standard diplomatic frequencies. Elena allowed herself a small smile. Humanity had been preparing for this moment for 200 years. While the Council debated and discussed, while they maintained their peaceful illusions and comfortable assumptions, humanity had grown strong in the shadows. The galaxy was about to discover that sometimes the most dangerous enemies were the ones you never saw coming. The emergency alarm echoed through the Council Defense Force Command Center as Captain Torres stared at the tactical display in disbelief. Red markers spread across the star map like a disease, each one representing a world that had gone silent in the past 3 days. 12 systems, 43 billion lives. All contact lost. The first reports had come from the rim worlds, those distant colonies at the edge of Council space where explorers pushed into the unknown regions of the galaxy. The initial messages were confusing, filled with static and broken transmissions. Ships emerging from dark space. Creatures unlike anything in the Council's vast biological databases. Weapons that tore through shields and armor as if they were paper. Torres had served in the Defense Force for 30 years, but those had been peaceful decades. His experience was limited to asteroid mining disputes and the occasional piracy incident. Nothing had prepared him for this. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission from the Harmony Station," reported Lieutenant Nash, her voice tight with stress. It's not good." The main screen flickered to life, showing the bridge of a Council cruiser. Captain Vex of the Altarian Navy appeared on screen, his usually calm blue skin now pale with fear. Behind him, warning lights flashed red, and the sound of explosions echoed through the ship's corridors. "This is Captain Vex to all Council forces," the alien captain said, his voice breaking. "We are under attack by unknown hostiles. They came out of nowhere, hundreds of ships, maybe thousands. Our weapons barely scratch their hulls, but they're cutting through our fleet like we're made of tin foil." The transmission shook as another explosion rocked the ship. They don't respond to any communication attempts. No surrender demands, no negotiations. They just keep coming, these things. They're not here to conquer. They're here to consume. Through the bridge windows behind Captain Vex, Torres caught a glimpse of the enemy. Dark ships with organic curves, moving in perfect formation like a swarm of insects. As he watched, one of the alien vessels extended what looked like feeding tubes toward a disabled Council ship, and the smaller vessel simply dissolved. "They're eating our ships," Vex whispered. "Dear stars, they're actually eating them." The transmission cut to static. Torres turned to his communications officer. "Get me a direct line to the Council chambers. Emergency priority." Within hours, representatives from all major Council species had gathered in the Great Hall on Centauri Prime. The chamber that had echoed with peaceful debate for 3,000 years now buzzed with panic and confusion. Delegates who had never raised their voices in anger now shouted over each other, demanding answers that no one had. Ambassador Wynne sat in humanity's small section near the back of the chamber, listening carefully as the Council's greatest minds struggled to comprehend what they were facing. The military reports painted a terrifying picture. The enemy moved faster than anything in the Council databases. Their technology seemed to adapt to each new weapon used against them. Most disturbing of all, they showed no interest in communication or negotiation. "What do they want?" demanded the Centaurian Prime Minister, her tentacles writhing with anxiety. "Every species can be reasoned with. Every conflict has a solution through diplomacy." General Cross of the Altarian Defense Command stood slowly, his ancient frame trembling. "I've reviewed all the tactical data from the lost systems. These creatures, they don't want territory. They don't want resources in the way we understand them. They want biomass. They're consuming everything organic they encounter and converting it into more of themselves." The chamber fell silent. For a species that had built its civilization on the principle that all life was sacred, the concept was almost incomprehensible. "Impossible," whispered the Andromedan delegate. "No sapient species would behave in such a manner. There must be some misunderstanding." "Tell that to the 43 billion dead," Cross replied grimly. As the debate raged on, Ambassador Wynne took careful notes. The Council's response was exactly what humanity had predicted it would be. Committees were formed to study the problem. Diplomatic envoys were dispatched to attempt communication with the invaders. Research teams were assembled to analyze the limited tactical data available, but no one talked about fighting back. Not really. The Council had grown so comfortable in their peaceful existence that they had forgotten how to think like warriors. Days passed and the situation grew worse. The creatures that some Council scientists had begun calling the Ravagers pushed deeper into civilized space. Their ships arrived in massive swarms, overwhelming any resistance through sheer numbers. They showed no interest in the Council's attempts at communication, treating peaceful envoys the same way they treated warships, as food to be consumed. The Defense Force tried everything in their tactical manuals. They attempted to establish defensive perimeters, but the Ravagers simply went around them. They tried concentrated firepower attacks, but the enemy ships seemed to adapt to each new weapon after only a few hits. They attempted to study Ravager technology from captured wreckage, only to discover that the organic components dissolved into useless sludge within hours of being separated from the main ship. Captain Torres found himself promoted to Admiral Torres as the casualties mounted and senior officers fell to the relentless advance. He stood on the bridge of the flagship New Dawn, watching long-range sensors track the enemy's movement toward the core worlds. "They're learning," he said to his tactical officer. "Each engagement, they adapt faster. Our weapons that worked in the first battle are useless by the third. What do we do, sir?" asked the officer. Torres had no answer. His training had prepared him for negotiation, for peacekeeping, for the kind of limited conflicts that arose between civilized species. This was something else entirely. This was war in its purest, most brutal form, and the Council had forgotten how to wage it. Back on Earth, General Reed watched the Council's military responses through intercepted communications with growing concern. The alien forces were brave, he had to give them that. They threw themselves at the Ravager swarms with desperate courage, sacrificing ship after ship to buy time for civilian evacuations. But their tactics were predictable, their technology inadequate, and their understanding of total warfare non-existent. "How long do you estimate the Council has?" asked Dr. Voss during their daily briefing. Reed studied the tactical projections. "At this rate, 6 months, maybe 8. The Ravagers are accelerating their advance. They're not just consuming ships and colonies anymore. They're learning from each battle, incorporating Council technology into their own systems. And if the Council falls, then Earth becomes the next target, along with every other world in the galaxy." The irony wasn't lost on Reed. Humanity had spent 2 centuries preparing for the day they might have to fight the Council, never imagining that they might have to fight to save them instead. In the Council chambers, the debates continued. Some delegates proposed fleeing to the outer spiral arms, abandoning the core worlds to the Ravagers. Others suggested attempting to negotiate a peaceful coexistence, offering the invaders uninhabited systems in exchange for leaving populated worlds alone. Ambassador Wynn listened to it all with growing amazement. Even facing extinction, these aliens clung to their peaceful ideals. They would rather die than become the monsters they feared. Data was admirable in its way. It was also going to get them all killed. Finally, Wynn stood and requested permission to address the chamber. The other delegates looked at him with barely concealed pity. What could the representative of a primitive species possibly contribute to such a crisis? "Honored delegates," Wynn began, his voice carrying clearly through the vast chamber. "Earth would like to offer its assistance in this matter." A few delegates actually chuckled. The Andromedan ambassador smiled condescendingly. "We appreciate the gesture, Ambassador Wynn, but I fear this is beyond the capabilities of your people. Perhaps Earth could assist with refugee operations." Wynn nodded graciously. "Of course. We would be happy to help in whatever way the Council deems appropriate." As the session ended and delegates filed out to continue their desperate planning, Wynn remained in his seat, composing a message to Earth. The Council had just made the biggest mistake in their 3,000-year history. They had dismissed humanity as irrelevant to the greatest crisis they had ever faced. Soon, they would learn just how wrong they were. Fleet Admiral Nash stood frozen on the bridge of Centauri Station as his sensors registered something impossible. The long-range scanners showed ships emerging from hyperspace in the outer system, but these weren't the organic curves of Ravager vessels. These were sleek, angular craft that moved with precision the Admiral had never seen before, human ships. Hundreds of them. "Sir," His communications officer called out, voice cracking with disbelief. "I'm reading over 800 vessels in the initial wave. They're using stealth technology it's more advanced than anything in our databases." Nash stared at the tactical display. Each human ship was larger than the crude mining vessels he'd seen in intelligence reports. These weren't the primitive cargo haulers that bumbled between Earth and Mars. These were warships, built for one purpose only. "How is this possible?" Nash whispered. "The humans barely have interplanetary capability." His answer came as the human fleet moved deeper into the system. They weren't heading toward Centauri Station to offer support. They weren't following standard Council fleet protocols. Instead, they vanished. One moment, 800 human ships filled the sensors. The next moment, they were gone. Captain Rodriguez crouched in the maintenance shaft of a Ravager hive ship, her team moving silently through the organic corridors. The human boarding craft had cut through the alien vessel's hull like it was made of soft metal, depositing strike teams throughout the massive ship without triggering a single alarm. This was what humans did best. Not the honorable fleet battles the Council preferred, but the dirty work of war. The kind of fighting that required getting close enough to smell your enemy's fear. Rodriguez's scanner showed the layout of the hive ship's critical systems. The Ravagers had built their vessels like living creatures, with redundant organs and healing capabilities that made them nearly impossible to destroy from the outside. But humans had learned long ago that even the toughest organism had weak points. "Team Alpha, move to the neural center," she whispered into her cum. "Team Beta, hit the breeding chambers. Team Gamma, you're with me. We're going for the Queen." The human soldiers moved through the ship like antibodies through a bloodstream, striking at vital organs with surgical precision. They carried weapons the Council had never seen, devices that disrupted biological functions and turned the Ravagers' own adaptive abilities against them. Rodriguez found the Queen, chambered deep in the ship's core. The creature was massive, easily 50 meters long, its bloated form pulsing as it produced new Ravager drones. Dozens of smaller aliens tended to it, feeding it nutrients and carrying away freshly spawned warriors. The human captain smiled grimly and activated her weapon. The device looked simple, almost primitive compared to Council energy weapons. But it had been designed specifically for this moment, based on 2 centuries of biological research into every species humanity had encountered. The weapon released a cloud of engineered viruses into the chamber's atmosphere. Within seconds, the Queen's attendants began to convulse. Within minutes, they were dead. The Queen herself lasted longer, her massive immune system fighting desperately against the human-made plague. But even she eventually succumbed. Throughout the ship, other human teams completed their missions. The Ravager hive ship, previously invulnerable to Council weapons, began to die from within. Admiral Torres watched from his flagship as the impossible unfolded before his eyes. The human fleet had appeared throughout the battle zone without warning, striking at Ravager forces with tactics he'd never imagined. They didn't engage in the direct ship-to-ship combat that had proven so ineffective for Council forces. Instead, they hit supply lines, communication relays, and staging areas. Most disturbing of all, they seemed to understand Ravager biology better than the Council's own xenobiologists. "Sir," his tactical officer reported, "we're seeing massive disruptions in Ravager formations. Their coordination is breaking down. Ships are attacking each other in some sectors." Torres pulled up the detailed sensor readings. The human attacks weren't just physical. They were using some form of biological warfare that was turning the Ravager's hive mind against itself. Queen variants that had coordinated perfectly for months were now fighting for dominance, their fleets scattered and confused. How did they know? Torres asked himself. How did the humans know exactly how to hurt them? The answer came from intercepted human communications. The primitive species that the Council had dismissed as harmless had been studying every piece of biological data they could acquire for 200 years. They had mapped the genetic structure of every council species they'd encountered, analyzed their weaknesses, and prepared countermeasures. When the Ravagers appeared, humanity had simply applied the same ruthless analysis to a new target. Dr. Lisa Chun stood in the command center of a human research vessel, surrounded by holographic displays showing Ravager genetic structures. Her team had been working around the clock since the first alien specimens had been captured, breaking down the enemy's biological secrets with an efficiency that would have terrified the council delegates. The neural interface is their greatest strength and their greatest weakness, she explained to the strike team leaders via secure transmission. Disrupt the chemical signals between the Queen variants, and their coordination collapses, but we need to be surgical about it. Too much disruption and they'll adapt. Too little and they'll recover. The humans had learned something during their violent evolution that the peaceful council species never had to. How to study your enemy not just to understand them, but to destroy them completely. Chun's biological weapons were works of art, designed to exploit specific weaknesses in Ravager physiology while leaving council species unharmed. They attacked the aliens' communication networks, their reproductive systems, and their ability to adapt to new threats. Each weapon was tailored for maximum damage with minimum recovery time. Back on Centauri Station, Admiral Nash received reports that made him question everything he thought he knew about humanity. Human forces weren't just fighting the Ravagers. They were winning. Systems that had been written off as lost were reporting successful liberation. Ravager fleets that had seemed unstoppable were retreating in disorder. But the methods humanity used violated every principle of civilized warfare. They didn't attempt to capture enemy personnel for interrogation. They didn't try to minimize collateral damage. They didn't follow the Council's rules of engagement that had been developed over 3 millennia of peaceful conflict resolution. "Sir," his aide reported quietly, "we're receiving casualty reports from the liberated systems, the human forces. They used orbital bombardment on infested population centers, cities with millions of Council civilians inside." Nash felt sick. "How many?" 17 million confirmed dead, sir. All Council species. The humans say it was necessary to prevent Ravager adaptation and reinfestation. The Admiral stared at the tactical display, watching human ships continue their relentless advance against the alien invaders. They were saving the galaxy, but the cost in innocent lives was staggering. The humans fought like they were willing to destroy worlds to save them. General Reed reviewed the battle reports from his command post deep beneath Earth's Pacific Ocean. The campaign was proceeding better than expected. Human forces had successfully disrupted Ravager coordination across 14 systems, and their biological weapons were proving devastatingly effective against the alien invaders. But Reed knew the real war was just beginning. The Council species were watching humanity reveal its true capabilities, and their reaction was everything he'd feared it would be. Horror, disgust, growing suspicion about what humanity had become during its centuries of supposed primitiveness. "Sir," his aide reported, "we're intercepting communications between Council military leaders. They're discussing contingency plans." Reed nodded grimly. "For dealing with the Ravagers?" "No, sir, for dealing with us." The general wasn't surprised. Humanity had saved 17 Council worlds in the past month, but they'd done it using methods that violated everything the peaceful aliens believed in. The Council was starting to realize that they hadn't just underestimated humanity's technological capabilities. They'd completely misunderstood what humans were willing to do to win. In the depths of space, human ships continued their invisible war against the Ravager swarms. They struck from stealth, used weapons that turned biology into a battlefield, and showed no mercy to enemies that had shown none to their victims. They were everything the Council wasn't: ruthless, efficient, and completely committed to victory at any cost. The Ravager threat was being contained, but a new question was emerging from the ashes of alien worlds. The Council had spent 3,000 years building a civilization based on peace, diplomacy, and the sanctity of all life. Humanity had just proven that sometimes those principles weren't enough. Now, they had to decide whether the species that had saved them was a blessing or a curse that would consume their peaceful galaxy just as surely as the Ravagers would have. Colonel Martinez walked through the ruins of New Geneva, his boots crunching on glass from shattered buildings. The city had been beautiful once, a shining example of council architecture with its flowing towers and gardens that reached toward the sky. Now it was a graveyard of twisted metal and broken dreams. The Ravagers had been gone for 3 weeks, driven out by human forces in a campaign that lasted only 6 hours. But the price of liberation was written in the empty streets and the mass graves that stretched beyond the horizon. 14 million council citizens dead, victims of both Ravager consumption and human weapons. "Colonel," called Captain Brown from across the plaza, "the survivors want to speak with you." Martinez nodded and followed the captain to a temporary shelter where a few hundred aliens huddled together. They were the lucky ones, the beings who had been in deep bunkers when the human orbital strikes began. They should have been grateful to be alive, but their eyes held something else entirely when they looked at their human liberators. Fear. An elderly Centaurian approached Martinez, her tentacles trembling with age and trauma. "Why?" she asked in broken standard. "Why did you destroy our city to save it?" Martinez had given this explanation dozens of times, but it never got easier. The Ravagers had infected the population centers. Their biological agents were spreading through the water supply, the air recycling systems. If we hadn't acted quickly, the contamination would have reached the underground shelters. "But there were children up there," the alien whispered. "Families, people who could have been evacuated." "There wasn't time," Martinez replied, but the words felt hollow even to him. The Ravager adaptation rate was too fast. Every hour we delayed would have meant more deaths. The Centaurian stared at him for a long moment, then turned away. Martinez understood her reaction. The humans had saved her world, but they'd done it by becoming something the Council species couldn't comprehend. Saviors who killed to save. Protectors who destroyed to protect. Back on Centauri Prime, the emergency council session had been going on for 16 hours. The great chamber that had once echoed with peaceful debate now rang with angry voices and desperate arguments. The delegates who had begged for humanity's help now faced the consequences of that assistance. "They're not following any recognized rules of warfare," shouted the Andromedan representative, his blue skin flushed with anger. "Orbital bombardment of civilian targets. Biological weapons that kill indiscriminately. Chemical attacks that render entire worlds uninhabitable for generations." The Altarian delegate stood slowly, his ancient frame shaking with emotion. "They saved my homeworld. Yes, the cost was terrible, but they saved it. Without human intervention, every living thing on Altara would have been consumed by the Ravagers." "At what cost?" demanded the Centaurian Prime Minister. "They turned our cities into graveyards. They poisoned our water, our air, our soil. Some of the liberated worlds will be uninhabitable for centuries." Ambassador Wynne sat quietly in Humanities section, listening to the debate with growing unease. He had known this moment would come, had prepared for it during his decades of service. But knowing and experiencing were different things. The horror in the aliens' voices, the disgust when they looked at him, the growing calls for humanity to be expelled from the galaxy they had helped save. "The question before us," said the Council's senior delegate, "is whether we can allow this to continue. Humanity's methods are effective, yes, but they violate everything we stand for as a civilization. What do you propose?" asked the Altarian. That we tell them to stop fighting? That we surrender to the Ravagers because we don't like how humans wage war? The chamber fell silent. Everyone knew the answer to that question. The Ravager advance had been stopped, but not defeated. Intelligence reports suggested that the aliens were regrouping in the Outer Rim, adapting to human tactics, preparing for a new assault. Without humanity's ruthless efficiency, the Council would fall within months. Dr. Lisa Chun stood before the Council's scientific committee, her presentation displaying the genetic structures of every known Ravager variant. The alien scientists stared at her work with a mixture of awe and revulsion. Her research was brilliant, revolutionary, and completely against everything they believed about the sanctity of life. "This is our final solution," Chun explained, her voice steady despite the hostile audience. "A targeted biological agent that will eliminate the Ravager species completely. It's designed to attack their core genetic structure, preventing adaptation or recovery." The lead Centaurian scientist raised a tentacle in objection. "You're talking about genocide, the complete extinction of an entire species." "Yes," Chun replied without hesitation. "The Ravagers have proven they cannot coexist with other life forms. They consume everything they encounter and show no capacity for negotiation or peaceful resolution. The only way to ensure galactic safety is to eliminate them entirely." "But the moral implications," protested the Andromedan researcher. "If we cross this line, if we accept that some species deserve extinction, what separates us from the monsters?" "We're fighting." Chun's expression hardened. "The difference is that we're fighting for survival. The Ravagers aren't. They're fighting for consumption. There's no moral equivalence here." The committee members exchanged uncomfortable glances. The human scientist was right, but her casual acceptance of genocide chilled them to their cores. This was what humanity had become during their centuries of hidden development. Not just technologically advanced, but morally flexible in ways that terrified the peaceful council species. General Reed received the committee's decision through encrypted channels. The Council had approved the use of humanity's biological weapons, but with conditions. Human forces would be monitored by Council observers. Civilian casualties would be minimized. And once the Ravager threat was eliminated, humanity would submit to a full review of their military capabilities and methods. Reed smiled grimly as he read the terms. The Council still didn't understand what they were dealing with. They thought they could control humanity, regulate their methods, and return to the peaceful status quo once the crisis was over. They had no idea that the war had already changed everything. "Sir," his aide reported, "the final phase is ready to begin. All human fleets are in position around the Ravager homeworld." Reed nodded and activated the fleet-wide communication system. "This is General Reed to all human forces. You have your orders. Execute Operation Cleansing Fire." The attack on the Ravager homeworld was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Human ships emerged from hyperspace in perfect coordination, their weapons already charged and targeting systems locked onto the planet below. There was no warning, no demand for surrender, no attempt at negotiation. The orbital bombardment lasted for 72 hours. Human weapons rained down on the planet's surface, each strike carefully calculated to maximize damage to Ravager breeding facilities and command centers. The biological agents that followed were even more devastating, spreading through the atmosphere like invisible death, seeking out and destroying every trace of Ravager genetic material. When it was over, the planet was silent. Not just empty, but sterilized. Every living thing on the surface was dead, and the biological agents would ensure that nothing could grow there again for thousands of years. The Ravager species was extinct. Admiral Torres watched the final reports come in from his flagship, his hands shaking as he read the casualty figures. Not human casualties, those were remarkably light. But the scale of destruction humanity had unleashed was beyond anything in recorded history. An entire species wiped from existence in less than a week. "Sir," his communications officer reported, "we're receiving a transmission from the human fleet commander." The screen activated, showing a human officer Torres didn't recognize. The man's face was calm, professional, showing no trace of emotion despite what he had just accomplished. "This is Admiral Thompson to all Council forces," the human said. "The Ravager threat has been eliminated. Our fleets will begin withdrawing to defensive positions within the week. We look forward to working with the Council to ensure this type of threat never emerges again." The transmission ended, leaving Torres staring at a blank screen. The human admiral had spoken as if he'd just completed a routine patrol, not committed. Genocide on a galactic scale. The casual tone was almost more disturbing than the act itself. Back on Earth, the hidden facilities that had built humanity's war machine began their next phase of operations. The galaxy was safe from the Ravager threat, but human leaders understood that the real challenge was just beginning. They had revealed their true capabilities to the Council, and the reaction was exactly what they'd expected. Fear, suspicion, and growing calls for humanity to be contained before they became a threat to everyone else. The war against the Ravagers was over. The war for humanity's place in the galaxy was about to begin. Ambassador David Liu walked through the corridors of the rebuilt council chambers, his footsteps echoing differently than they had 6 months ago. The marble floors were the same, the flowing architecture unchanged, but everything else had shifted in ways that could never be reversed. Where Ambassador Wynn had once sat in the back rows, quietly taking notes and enduring condescension, Liu now occupied the central podium reserved for the galaxy's most influential powers. The other delegates watched him with a mixture of respect and fear as he approached his new position. These were the same aliens who had dismissed humanity as primitive just a year ago. Now they hung on his every word, knowing that Earth's fleets patrolled their space and humanity's weapons could turn any world into a lifeless rock within hours. Liu activated the chamber's communication system, his voice carrying clearly to every corner of the vast hall. "The quarterly security report shows continued stability across all liberated systems," he announced. "Human defense forces have successfully prevented 3 attempted incursions by unknown hostiles, and our early warning networks have detected no new threats from beyond the galactic rim." The Centaurian delegate raised a tentacle nervously. "Ambassador Liu, there have been concerns about the scope of human patrol activities. Some of our member worlds report that human ships are conducting scans of their defensive installations." Liu's expression remained pleasant, but his tone carried an edge that hadn't been there in the old days. "Earth's commitment to galactic security requires us to maintain awareness of all potential vulnerabilities. We wouldn't want another Ravager-type incident to catch us unprepared." The unspoken message was clear. Humanity would go wherever they deemed necessary, scan whatever they wanted to scan, and do whatever they felt was required for galactic security. The Council could object, but they had no power to stop it. Dr. Patricia Wells stood in the command center of Orbital Station Prometheus, watching sensor displays that showed human ships deployed across half the galaxy. As the new director of the Human Defense Force, she commanded more firepower than the entire Council Navy had possessed before the war. The responsibility was staggering, but so was the opportunity. "Director," reported Captain Stone, "we're receiving protests from the Andromedan sector about our mining operations in the Vega system." Wells pulled up the tactical display. The Vega system contained rare elements needed for humanity's next generation of weapons, elements that had been off-limits under previous Council regulations. But those regulations had been written by a peaceful civilization that no longer existed. "What's the nature of their complaint?" Wells asked. "They claim the system contains archaeological sites of historical significance. They want us to halt operations and submit to a council review process. Wells considered this for a moment. The old humanity would have complied, grateful for any access to galactic resources. The new humanity had different priorities. Inform the Andromedans that human security needs take precedence over archaeological concerns, she decided. We'll be happy to preserve any artifacts we discover during our mining operations. Captain Stone looked uncomfortable. Ma'am, they're threatening to file a formal complaint with the Council Security Committee. Wells smiled. Let them. We control the Security Committee now. On the distant world of Kepler Prime, Governor Martin Chen reviewed the latest reports from his colonial administration. Kepler had been one of the worlds ravaged by the Ravagers, its population reduced from billions to millions. The survivors had welcomed human relief efforts with desperate gratitude, but that gratitude was slowly turning to unease. The humans had rebuilt Kepler's infrastructure with impressive efficiency, but they'd also established permanent military bases, resource extraction facilities, and monitoring stations. The local population was well fed and protected, but they were no longer truly free to govern themselves. Governor, his aide reported, the Keplerian Reconstruction Council is requesting another meeting about the new labor assignments. Chun sighed. The local aliens wanted their people to work in the rebuilt cities, pursuing their traditional arts and sciences. Humanity needed them in the mining facilities and manufacturing plants that would supply the growing human fleet. The needs of galactic security outweighed personal preferences. Tell them I'll meet with them next week, Chun decided, after the new mining quotas are established. Back on Earth, General Reed walked through the expanded underground facilities. That had once been humanity's greatest secret. Now they were the nerve center of a galactic empire, though no one called it that officially. The maps on his walls showed human influence spreading across the galaxy like ripples in a pond, carried by ships that moved faster and struck harder than anything their former masters could imagine. Sir, his intelligence chief reported, we're detecting signs of organized resistance in the outer colonies. Some of the council species are forming what they call preservation societies to maintain their pre-war cultures. Reed studied the intelligence reports with interest rather than concern. Let them preserve their cultures. Let them hold their secret meetings and dream of the old days. As long as they didn't interfere with human operations, they were harmless. Any military threats? He asked. None that we can detect. Their technology is still generations behind ours, and they have no experience with the kind of warfare we've mastered. Reed nodded. The council species had spent 3,000 years learning how to live in peace. Humanity had spent 3,000 years learning how to win wars. That difference would keep them in power for generations to come. In a small apartment on Centauri Prime, the former Admiral Torres sat in darkness, staring out at a sky filled with human patrol ships. He had been one of the Council's greatest military leaders, a hero of countless peacekeeping missions. Now he was retired. His service is no longer needed in a galaxy where humans handled all security matters. His comm unit chimed with an incoming message. Another invitation to join one of the resistance cells that met in secret, planning futile schemes to restore Council authority. Torres deleted the message without reading it. He had seen what human weapons could do to entire worlds. Any resistance would end in genocide, not liberation. The doorbell rang, and Torres opened it to find a young human officer standing in the hallway. The woman was barely out of her 20s, but she wore the insignia of a fleet commander. Admiral Torres, she said politely, I'm Commander Williams. I wanted to thank you personally for your service during the transition period. Your cooperation helped prevent unnecessary conflicts. Torres looked at the young human with a mixture of sadness and resignation. What are you really here for, Commander? Williams smiled. Earth is establishing a new galactic exploration program. We're looking for experienced officers to help us map the regions beyond the rim. The pay is excellent, and you'd be serving the cause of galactic security. You want me to help you expand human control even further. I want you to help us prevent another Ravager incident, Williams corrected. We need to know what else is out there, what other threats might be lurking in the dark spaces between stars. Torres considered the offer. He could refuse and spend his remaining years in comfortable retirement, watching humanity reshape the galaxy according to their vision. Or he could accept and at least have some influence over that process. What guarantees do I have about the treatment of any species we encounter? He asked. Williams's expression didn't change. The same guarantees we gave the Council. We'll protect them from external threats and ensure their basic needs are met. In return, they'll contribute to galactic security under human leadership. Torres. Understood. Any new species they discovered would face the same choice the Council had: accept human protection and human authority, or face the consequences. There would be no third option. I'll consider your offer, he said finally. As Williams left, Torres returned to his window. The human ships continued their eternal patrol, visible reminders of the new order that had emerged from the ashes of the Ravager War. The galaxy was safe, prosperous, and more unified than it had ever been under Council rule. It was also no longer free. In the depths of space beyond the galactic rim, automated human probes pushed into the darkness, scanning for new threats and new opportunities. The probes carried weapons capable of sterilizing entire systems and communication arrays that could summon the full might of humanity's fleet within hours. Earth had learned the most important lesson of the Ravager War: there was always a bigger threat waiting in the dark. Next time, humanity intended to find it first, study it completely, and be ready to destroy it before it could threaten the galaxy they now protected. The age of Council democracy was over. The age of human hegemony had begun. And in the shadows between the stars, humanity continued to grow stronger, preparing for whatever challenges the universe might throw at them next. The war had ended with humanity's victory, but peace would only last as long as humans remained the most dangerous predators in their part of the galaxy. Given their track record, that would likely be a very long time indeed.